Imagine being a teenage girl, pulled from your family, stripped of your freedom, and shut away behind towering golden walls that you will never escape. You are told this is an honor, a destiny that will bring prestige to your family and security to your future. But in reality, you have been chosen for a life of isolation, competition, and fear. Your beauty is your ticket inside, but it is also your curse. From this day forward, you belong not to yourself, but to one man, the Emperor of China, and even then, you may never see his face. For thousands of young women across centuries of Chinese history, this was not a dream, but a nightmare disguised in silks and jewels. This was the life of the concubine. Behind the shimmering walls of the Forbidden City, the outside world saw only grandeur, elegance, and endless wealth. But step inside, and you would find something very different. Thousands of women, cloistered together in the emperor's inner court, existed in a suffocating hierarchy where a single mistake could spell ruin. The emperor's empress stood at the top, followed by his consorts, his concubines, and below them, an entire army of maids and attendants. It wasn't just about luxury or rank. Every gesture, every bow, every flicker of emotion was governed by rules carved into stone. To rise even a little meant survival. To fall meant obscurity, or worse. The process of selection itself was its own kind of horror. During the Ming Dynasty, every unmarried girl was legally obligated to enter the imperial selection, regardless of class or wealth. No family could refuse. Under the Qing Dynasty, the rules became narrower, but no less ruthless. Girls from noble Manchu and Mongol families were gathered and brought before the emperor's court. They stood in endless lines, trembling as officials scrutinized their skin for blemishes, their hair for flaws, their bodies for signs of weakness. Even their sleeping habits were tested. A candidate might be forced to share a bed with the emperor's mother, observed in the night to see if she snored, twitched, or moved too much in her sleep. Imagine being a frightened young girl, lying awake, desperately trying not to breathe too loudly, knowing that one restless turn could end your chances forever. Those who passed these tests weren't rewarded with freedom, but with further training. They were taught to bow, to walk, to speak only when spoken to. They studied poetry and dance, calligraphy and song. Outwardly, it looked like education. In truth, it was conditioning, teaching them to survive in a world where a slip of the tongue or a misplaced glance could mean disaster. Out of hundreds of hopefuls, only a handful would ever be chosen, and even then, only 3 would be elevated to the highest rank of concubines. The rest would linger in the shadows, living out their lives in chambers they could not leave, serving an emperor they might never even meet. But selection was only the beginning. Life inside the palace was a constant storm of jealousy and danger. If the emperor showed you even the smallest favor, you became a target. Rivals whispered in corners. Eunuchs, those loyal only to the emperor, watched your every move, and rumors could spread like poison. Before entering the emperor's bedchamber, a concubine had to strip herself of any illusion of privacy. She bathed under supervision, her body inspected by physicians, her name written in vermilion ink as an official record of the emperor's nightly activities. What should have been an intimate moment was instead a matter of state, a decision that carried the weight of politics, legacy, and the survival of dynasties. And yet, for many women, that summons never came. They spent decades locked away in silken prisons, painting their faces, sewing elaborate robes, staring at the walls while they waited for a call that would never arrive. The palace was alive with grandeur, but for them it was a silent, gilded tomb. Even love was forbidden. The emperor was never to show too much affection to one woman for fear of disrupting the balance of his household. Jealousy was not only discouraged, it was punished. A concubine's purpose was not companionship, not love, but duty. Her life belonged to the empire. If you're drawn into this dark world of history's forgotten women, don't forget to subscribe. We uncover the hidden corners of the past, not to glorify them, but to remember the people who lived and suffered in silence. By joining us, you become part of that remembrance, ensuring these voices are never lost. And yet, the most chilling part of the concubine's story was not life within the Forbidden City. It was what came after. Because once the emperor died, the women who had once been treasured as jewels of the empire often found themselves transformed into relics of the past, discarded, forgotten, or forced into roles far more harrowing than anything they had endured in life. Some would become prisoners of the dead, their lives sacrificed in the name of loyalty. Others would wither away in silence, their existence erased by history. And as the emperor's soul departed this world, his women faced a fate that was often far worse than death itself. When an emperor's life came to an end, the walls of the Forbidden City did not fall silent. They whispered with dread, for every concubine knew that her fate now hung in the balance. She was no longer the possession of a living man. She was now the property of the dead. And in ancient China, that often meant that she too would be taken to the grave. Archaeological digs have uncovered chilling evidence. Tombs filled not only with emperors, but with the bodies of young women, buried alive or executed to accompany their lord into the afterlife. To the outside world, this was described as an honor, a final service of loyalty. But in truth, it was a death sentence cloaked in ritual. Women who had once adorned themselves in silks now lay in cold earth, silenced forever, their beauty wasted in the darkness of the grave. Even in dynasties where such sacrifices had faded, life after the emperor's death was rarely merciful. High-ranking concubines with powerful families might be allowed to return home, their lives spent in quiet seclusion. But those from humble backgrounds, the vast majority, were left behind. Many were confined to shadowy palace quarters, forbidden from contact with the outside world. They existed like ghosts, living reminders of a reign that had ended. Others were forced into Buddhist nunneries, stripped of their identities, their names replaced by vows of silence and devotion. Some were stationed at imperial tombs, condemned to live their lives in mourning, caretakers of the dead emperor's grave, until their own deaths finally released them. In the darkest chapters of this tradition, concubines were not merely abandoned, they were erased. Some were compelled to end their own lives, others executed outright. For the empire, their deaths were symbolic acts of devotion, but for the women themselves, they were nothing but cruelty, an obliteration of self. It is hard to imagine the terror that gripped a concubine's heart as she watched her emperor take his last breath, knowing it could very well spell the end of her own. And yet, among the shadows, rare stories of defiance flicker. Wu Zetian entered the palace as a teenage concubine, destined to serve in silence. But after being sent to a Buddhist convent upon her emperor's death, she defied her fate, returned to the palace, and rose to power, eventually becoming the only female emperor in Chinese history. She was an anomaly, a storm that broke through the suffocating system. But for every Wu Zetian, there were thousands who vanished quietly, their names lost, their faces erased, their suffering buried beneath centuries of silence. Even in later dynasties, where the cruelty softened, the prison of concubinage never truly opened. In the Qing dynasty, some women committed suicide voluntarily, hoping that death would grant them dignity in a world that denied them freedom. Others were left alive, but trapped, their movements confined, their voices muted. Stories tell of concubines who risked secret affairs, desperate for connection, only to face brutal punishment when discovered. Their longing for love was treated as treason. For them, even a stolen moment of human tenderness could mean death. By the 20th century, the system began to crumble. Emperor Puyi, China's last monarch, was forced from the Forbidden City in 1924. His concubine, Wang Xiu, made history by demanding something unthinkable, a divorce. Stripped of her title, she returned to ordinary life, working as a teacher until her death. Her story marked the symbolic end of concubinage, one final act of quiet rebellion against centuries of oppression. Yet, even in her freedom, the echoes of those who had come before her lingered like restless ghosts, their lives bound forever to a palace that had been both their prison and their grave. For centuries, the concubines of China lived in a world that glittered with beauty but stank of despair. They were dressed in jewels, yet treated as possessions. They were envied, yet imprisoned. They were called favored, yet discarded. Their lives remind us of a haunting truth that power often builds its thrones on the backs of the voiceless, and history often forgets those who suffer most. As we leave the shadows of the Forbidden City behind, one question lingers. Were these women victims of their time or survivors in the face of unimaginable oppression? Perhaps the truth is both, and perhaps the most haunting legacy they leave us is not their silence, but the quiet strength it took to endure in a world determined to erase them. Tell me, what do you think when you hear the stories of these forgotten women? Were they prisoners, martyrs, or something more complex? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because remembering them is the only way to keep their voices alive.